President Gustavo Petro of Colombia is an illegal drug leader strongly encouraging the massive production of drugs in big and small fields all over Colombia. Petro better close up these killing fields immediately, or the United States will close them up for him, and it won't be done nicely. When President Trump posted that on Truth Social, it was the latest escalation in his ongoing feud against the Colombian president that has so far seen the US revoke Petro's visa, and Petro compare Trump to Hitler and accuse Washington of committing murder. The feud is more than just a case of two world leaders not liking each other, though. It's a reflection of the increasing tensions between Washington and South American governments, particularly Colombia and Venezuela, stemming from the Trump administration's aggressive counter-narcotic strategy. The administration recently determined that the US is at war with drug cartels, calling them the Al-Qaeda of the Western Hemisphere, and has mobilized military assets in the Caribbean to intercept vessels suspected of trafficking. Since September, the Navy has struck 7 boats, killing at least 32 people. While most of the strikes have been focused on Venezuelan drug cartels, the most recent one targeted a vessel linked to the ELN, a Colombian guerrilla group that Washington has long considered a terrorist organization. For Washington, these strikes have been a resounding success, with President Trump claiming that each strike has saved at least 25,000 American lives. However, Colombia and Venezuela, they see things differently. They see these strikes as an attack on their sovereignty and, in Venezuela's case, an attempt at regime change. A belief that was strengthened after the New York Times reported that Trump had authorized the CIA to carry out covert actions in the country. Beyond Bogota and Caracas, other countries in Latin America are watching Washington's actions with increasing apprehension. One Latin American diplomat based in the US told the Spanish outlet El País, and we'll quote them here, "There is a fear of who might be next, and also a certain confidence that countries that maintain a good relationship with Washington will be spared, although with this administration you never know." End quote. The diplomat's comments perfectly encapsulate Latin America's unease that the administration's escalating rhetoric signals the return of an era where US intervention was the norm rather than the exception. An era defined by the Monroe Doctrine. First articulated in 1823 by James Monroe, America's 5th president, the Monroe Doctrine is a foreign policy principle that declares the US would not allow foreign powers to intervene in the Americas, which it considers its sphere of influence. Any attempt at intervention could be considered a hostile act against America's interests. At the time this policy was developed, America was not a world power and left the enforcement of the doctrine to the British, who had a stronger navy and viewed this as an example of American and British policy aligning by chance, one they used to impose their own Pax Britannia policy. Additionally, the region's biggest concern was that Spain would attempt to reassert its control over former colonies that had gained their independence. The world, though, has changed quite a bit since 1823, hasn't it? Now the US is the world's preeminent military power. The British Navy is in a state that can be charitably called decline. Latin American nations are now sovereign states with their own foreign policies and international relationships. And from Washington's point of view, the threats facing the hemisphere have evolved from European colonialism to drug trafficking, migration, and the influence of Iran, China, and Russia. Likewise, the policy has evolved significantly, changing from what the authors originally saw as a statement of America's objection to colonization into the justification for a more interventionist foreign policy. This change was primarily caused by President Teddy Roosevelt. He added the Roosevelt Corollary, a statement saying that the US could exercise an international police power if Latin American countries had, and we'll quote him here, chronic wrongdoing or an impotence which results in a general loosening of the ties of civilized society. Now, the impact of this reinterpretation would be most visible during the 20th century, when the US would use it as a justification for scores of invasions, interventions, and CIA regime changes. This is beginning to sound oddly familiar, isn't it? The doctrine fell out of favor toward the end of the 20th century, but got renewed attention because of the first Trump administration. In his book, Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo cited the Monroe Doctrine as the justification for the administration's actions in Venezuela. Quoting him here, "Beside destroying the Venezuelan economy, the Chavez and Maduro regimes strengthened relationships with America's adversaries. Iran has used Venezuela as a transshipment point for metals and minerals for its nuclear program. China has invested $67 billion in the country. Russia is the main source of the Venezuelan military's arms. In the Trump administration, we couldn't tolerate a nation just 1,400 miles from Florida putting out the welcome mat for Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, and the cartels in a 21st century violation of the Monroe Doctrine. We concluded that if left unaddressed, the Venezuela problem would fester, with terrible security consequences for the American people and our hemisphere." Although Mike Pompeo is not a part of the current Trump administration, this framing underpins the administration's view of foreign policy, which is best demonstrated by the forthcoming national defense strategy, which places greater emphasis on the Western Hemisphere. In Latin American capitals, the echoes are unmistakable. Just as past administrations used the Monroe Doctrine and the threat of communism to launch campaigns against unpopular governments, the Trump administration has recast counter-narcotics, border security, and countering foreign adversaries as pretexts for military action, CIA operations, and economic coercion throughout the region. Beyond what we have already mentioned in our introduction on Venezuela and Colombia, the Trump administration has also targeted Mexico, Panama, and Brazil. In Mexico, the administration has pointed to the drug and immigration crisis to justify sending in CIA-controlled MQ-9 Reaper drones, militarizing the border, and designating cartels as terrorist organizations. In Panama, to reduce China's influence, Trump threatened to take back the Panama Canal, and the Panamanian president recently claimed that the US embassy was threatening to cancel visas. And in Brazil, the administration ratcheted up pressure on the country in the lead-up to President Xi Jinping's visit, with multiple US officials voicing opposition to Brazil's potential ascension to the Belt and Road Initiative. As the Trump administration continues pursuing its version of the Monroe Doctrine, we really have to ask whether it's working.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, me, or more precisely, my website, fronts.co. Have you ever found yourself thinking, there's just not enough content on WarFronts. 6 videos a week is just not enough for me. I want the world to be crazier. I want more war, more death. Well, 1, what's wrong with you? And 2, well, great news. Extra WarFronts content is now at your fingertips over at fronts.co. Look at that. Yes, starting this very week, we'll be posting 2 exclusive videos every week to our new subscriber-only website, fronts.co. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to brand new WarFronts content that won't be available on YouTube. Our first videos are already up, exploring topics as timely as whether Poland could win a war against Russia, and as timeless as how South Korea came to build the best tank on Earth. And to sweeten the deal, we're also asking our writers to contribute 2 in-depth written articles each week, exploring some unusual or less appreciated angle on geopolitics and warfare. So, not only will you get more of the videos you love, you'll also get a chance to read some of our writers' unfiltered takes on war news. So look, if you like this channel, you'll love fronts.co. Again, $5 a month. It helps support us here at Fronts, WarFronts, Political Fronts, and fronts.co. And nothing is changing here. I have learned from the mistakes of past YouTubers. We are not doing a paywall on any existing content. The 6 videos a week will be here for you just as before. It's all just gravy, baby! Don't know why I went all Austin Powers there. But yeah, fronts.co. Just go there. Good domain, right? It was expensive.
Like most geopolitical questions, this does not have a straightforward answer. On the one hand, the Trump administration has had several major victories from this strategy. The biggest victory is perhaps the reduction in the number of immigrants coming to the US from South America, which was one of Trump's key campaign promises. Additionally, Washington could point to the fact that Mexico deployed 10,000 additional troops to help police the border. In Panama, President Jose Raul Mulino announced that the country would not renew its participation in the Belt and Road Initiative. Panama would also increase cooperation with the US on migration by offering Panama as a bridge for deported migrants while they wait to go back to their home countries. But perhaps Trump's biggest win in Panama is a deal that would see CK Hutchinson, a Hong Kong-based corporation that operated ports near the Panama Canal, sell its operations to a consortium led by US asset manager BlackRock, effectively bringing the Panama Canal back under American control. And that deal made Beijing, in a word, livid. Beyond this, China is also losing ground in other Latin American countries. In Mexico, Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer BYD announced that it had cancelled the construction of a factory. The project would have had the capacity to produce up to 150,000 cars per year, generating millions of dollars for Beijing. In Ecuador, Chinese company Terra Earth Resources cancelled 4 projects after President Noboa's government decided to suspend exploration and exploitation activities due to non-compliance with environmental regulations. On the drug front, Nahar Tuzi, Politico's senior foreign affairs correspondent, writes that, and we'll quote her here, Trump deserves credit for forcing more attention on the cartels, their transnational reach, and Americans' sad addiction to fentanyl and other drugs, as well as how US adversaries such as China are involved. End quote. Several experts that she interviewed also praised Trump's decision to designate cartels as terrorist organizations because it provided law enforcement and the military more legal tools to go after cartels and others affiliated with them. However, that is where the victories end. Virtually everyone that Tusi spoke to said that Trump's pressure tactics won't end or substantially reduce the threat of cartels, with one Washington-based analyst saying that the approach was aggressive but not innovative. Additionally, the experts believed that Trump's actions threatened to strengthen the cartels instead of weakening them. Consider the tariffs. While ostensibly meant to pressure Mexico to deal with the cartels and reduce illegal immigration, they might just weaken Mexico's economy to the point where people view the cartels or immigrating to America as a viable option, despite the challenges that both pose. In Colombia, after his argument with President Petro, Trump threatened steep new tariffs and said he would suspend US subsidies. At the time of writing, this hasn't happened yet, but if it did, it would be catastrophic for Colombia because it already lost a significant amount of funds when the Trump administration gutted US aid. Over the years, the majority of American aid to Colombia has been dedicated to fighting drug trafficking and supporting law enforcement initiatives. Additional funding is focused on development programs and economic assistance aimed at expanding Colombia's economic base. Any further cuts would make it harder for Bogotá to achieve its own goals of rural development that could provide licit economic activities to mushrooming coca production. Elizabeth Dickinson, the senior analyst for Colombia at the International Crisis Group, put it this way, quoting, "If the US were truly interested in countering drug trafficking, the last thing you would do is to alienate the one military in the region that has the capability to take the fight to the drug traffickers. It's totally illogical." End quote. The administration's strategy is also facing significant challenges at home, often of its own creation. While Washington wages war on cartels abroad, it has significantly reduced the amount of funds earmarked for addiction treatment. The administration also laid off researchers who had tracked drug use by Americans for 50 years, collecting data that many frontline addiction care providers view as vital. This comes after the CDC reported that overdose deaths had fallen to their lowest level since June 2020, with experts crediting expanded treatment access and naloxone distribution. Beyond the drug war, President Trump might also be unable to achieve one of his key objectives, ousting Maduro. After the initial fears around the possibility of a coup died down, the Maduro government seems to have locked in for an attritional battle with the Trump administration. A businessman familiar with the Maduro government's thinking told the Wall Street Journal that the regime was now looking to call Trump's bluff. Quoting him here, "They don't believe the US will do anything to get rid of him or capture him. I also don't believe it. The US has been trying to splinter them, but the result of this is that we've put them closer. They're much closer right now than they've ever been." And this is a view supported by Tim Weiner, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author whose work has focused on the CIA and who drew a parallel between Maduro's ability to survive despite America's concerted efforts to remove him from power and that of Cuba's longtime strongman Fidel Castro. This might be one of those instances where the Monroe Doctrine clashes with the messy realities of national sovereignty and competing interests. An entrenched authoritarian leader who has brutally clamped down on dissent, rallied the army around him, and secured enough foreign support that could prove remarkably resilient to American pressure. Especially if Washington is unwilling to fully commit resources to what would be a long and grueling campaign and an even longer, more expensive rebuilding process. Still, that doesn't mean Washington is out of options. As we pointed out in our last video on Venezuela, the administration might choose to use limited airstrikes to create the conditions necessary for the Venezuelan people to oust Maduro. If this fails, there's always negotiations. Whenever we talk about foreign policy, it's easy to get lost in theories as interesting as the Monroe Doctrine or high-level conversations about how Maduro can survive Washington's latest attempts at removing him from power. And it's understandable. Authors and politicians have made a career out of presenting geopolitics as this high-stakes game of chess where the fate of nations hinges on a single person making the right call at the right moment. This is why The Diplomat is one of the most watched shows on Netflix right now. I was watching it last night. However, we have tried to make a career out of presenting the human side of geopolitics, showing that every decision has an impact not just on the countries, but on the people who live there. And today, we'd like to focus on the boat strike that we mentioned in our introduction that targeted a 4-man vessel linked to Colombian rebel group ELN. For the first time since the strike started, there were 2 survivors, an Ecuadorian and a Colombian. Instead of prosecuting them, the Trump administration chose to repatriate them back to their home countries for detention and prosecution, which has raised one key question among regional observers. If the administration had enough evidence to bomb their vessel, why didn't it use the same evidence to pursue prosecution? That question was brought into sharper focus when the Ecuadorian government released their survivor, claiming that they found no evidence that he had committed a crime. The Colombian survivor arrived in the country with a traumatic brain injury, sedated, medicated, and breathing with the help of a ventilator, according to Colombia's interior minister. Now, we're not saying that these men were secretly pious, law-abiding angels who spent their spare time saving orphaned puppies and handing out sweets to neighborhood kids. They may have been drug traffickers, and the Trump administration may well have had enough evidence to warrant a strike on the boat. What we are saying, though, is that such strikes exist in a complicated grey area that makes it difficult for any survivors or the families of the deceased to get justice if they are actually innocent. And for the people left behind in the South American villages near the coast, there's an overwhelming sense of fear that they'll be next. One resident told the AFP, "Are we in Afghanistan? In Israel? Places like that, or what? This is the Caribbean, my brother. Peace and love. Thank you for watching."